Hello, this is Paul, the Oka Knight, and welcome back to the continuation of our Drive on Giessen campaign. We had just finished the early morning turn of day one and had some interesting results. In the far south, the Soviets did a lot of damage to the American armored cavalry, who barely avoided a complete collapse. Even so, the troopers suffered a serious loss and are now hunkered down in the vicinity of Fulda, awaiting the continuation of the morning's fight. Moving north, where the Americans fielded not one but two troops of armored cavalry, they did much better. While it was inevitable that they would fall back, they did so in good order. Continuing north, the Bundeswehr achieved a tactical surprise versus the Soviets. While the Soviet armor formation met its objectives and did some damage to the defending Leopard tanks, it did so only after recovering from a blistering EW attack. Good enough to prevent a breakthrough. Meanwhile, the Soviet motor rifle battalion attacking in the north were stopped cold by the Bundeswehr territorial infantry, who fired their Milans to great effect until the weather closed in and stopped all offensive operations. Finally, the solitary Soviet armored battalion attacking in the far north was stopped cold by a combination of air power and a nasty artillery-delivered minefield. The Soviets suffered 65% casualties. As I've mentioned in an earlier video, I will be rolling and applying replacements at the end of each turn. In this case, the only noteworthy recovery was by the Soviet northernmost force, who recovered up to its 65% of its effectiveness. Still, they're not feeling all that good. And now we move on to the late morning of day one. First, we deploy the air recon. Recall that the Soviets suffered 2 losses of the 5 available air recon units in the early morning, so they are operating at a handicap. Even so, they rolled reasonably well and have a decent idea of what is in front of them. NATO, still having 5 air recon units, also have a good working knowledge of what is in front of them, up and down the line. On the ground, the Soviets continue their advance from earlier in the day, with the exception of the far north. There, the advance must pause, pending the arrival of more replacements. Recall that when a unit does not engage in ground combat, it will roll on the better table for recovering strength. So, both the Soviets and the Bundeswehr will have a good chance to recover strength in the coming turn. In addition, because of the lull in fighting, the Germans will have a chance to dig in. The main axis of a Soviet advance is in the American sector, with maximum pressure being placed on the decimated armor cavalry in Fulda. The late morning will see a strong push by the Soviets to break through at Fulda. That being said, the danger has been recognized by NATO, and an additional armored cavalry troop is being diverted from the defenses farther north. But because one ground formation has remained in the area, the packed forces have to conduct a tactical battle in the area and cannot simply pass through. A note on Drive on Giessen rules here. The rules as written have the Soviet forces make their moves before NATO gets their chance to move. The question is, what is the effect of Soviet forces entering a zone occupied by NATO units? Does NATO have the opportunity to leave? If they leave, does Warsaw Pact have a chance to do a second move? The rules are really not clear on this point. Here is what I will do. First, Pact entry into a zone does not freeze the defenders. They are allowed to leave. But helicopter FOBs, forward operating bases, may only vacate if and only if a ground formation remains in place to put up a fight. If no ground formation remains in the area, then the FOB is destroyed as per the rules as written. Should all friendly FOBs have been destroyed, then all helicopter aviation assets are removed from the campaign for that side. Otherwise, they simply move to the available FOB. For this purpose, all NATO and PAC FOBs may be used by all helo assets for that alliance. All helo assets stationed at a destroyed FOB are allowed to relocate to any friendly surviving FOB. Relocating helos may not take part in any engagements the turn they relocate to a new FOB. Second, if NATO vacates the area without fighting, Then the packed formations, having moved into the vacated area, get to move a second time. Third, any formation moving 2 zones in a turn suffers a -2 penalty on their surprise roll should they enter an occupied zone unsupported. The penalty applies to all formations declaring a double move at the beginning of their turn, including the first zone entered, as well as any formation making a second move due to NATO withdrawal or results on the battle map. Recall that units advancing off the tactical battle space too early, quote-unquote, may also get a second move on the operations map. For this purpose, unsupported means there are no friendly ground formations in the area entered who have moved at most 1 zone. So, if you have only formations that have moved 2 zones, they don't help you any. If you have a formation that is moving its second zone, moving into the same area that a formation has only moved 1 zone to get there, then they're helped. Then this penalty does not apply. The idea here is simple. The faster a formation advances, the less chance they have to take precautions against being ambushed. There is a trade-off here. As we have already seen once, being surprised in the battle space can cause bad things to happen. But there are times when speed of advance can knock a defender back on his heels and is more important than caution. Okay, finally, support assets such as off-map artillery, helicopters stationed at a FOB that has moved, and off-board anti-air may not project combat power out of the area they occupy if they move more than 1 area that turn. In other words, such units operate normally if they move 1 area in a turn, but not if they move beyond that. This is the setup for the continuation of the campaign into the late morning of the first day. Before we break, a word on how I propose to continue on with the campaign. To this point, I have fought out, recorded, and uploaded each and every engagement that was fought. In order to move things along, I will take the more focused approach of showing the more important fights and only summarizing the rest. I will still fight each and every engagement, but will only show you the good stuff in detail. By now, you should have a pretty good idea of how the rules operate. Now let's focus a bit more on how the campaign runs. So with all that said, we are now on to the Battle of Fulda.